Okay, well, welcome everyone to our workshop meeting. Nice to have some people in the audience. Only half of them are presenting, so whatever. First, we have a few things to go over. New business approval of HDRB recommendation for planning engineering services. There are two of them, 126 Main Street and 35 Market Street. This has been going on for quite some time. I think we're finally there. They're recommending AKRF to do the environmental planning engineering consultant to work with on these two projects. Hi Doug, we were just wondering where you were.
Good evening.
So,
You want to stay home and watch the game?
What's that?
You want to stay home and watch the game? That's a front row seat.
Maybe we should just have it on somewhere. So I'd like to make a motion to follow the recommendation of HDRB and to hire AKRF as consultant planning engineers for 126 and 35 Market.
Second?
Any further discussion on this?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you everyone and people, applicants for being patient on this. Let's get some of these. Have Jeff staple these. Next, Karen, you're up. Discuss installation of stoop and sidewalk on said 126 Main Street. A lot of action on 126. How are you, Karen?
Well, we wish there were more action, but
What?
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's
Wrong
okay.
term.
That's okay. That's okay. No, thank you. My name's Karen Parks. I'm here tonight with Sue Costigan, who is the owner of 126 Main Street. And as you know, we're kind of in the thick of our process with all of the village boards, the planning, zoning, and historic review board. But in anticipation of also having questions for your board, we wanted to come before you tonight to just discuss and clarify what will be required down the road, provided we get our approvals, and completing our tie-ins between our proposed building and the existing village sidewalk. As there's a strip of land which would fall between the property line and the existing sidewalk, and we'll need to make certain connections both in the way of sidewalks connecting an alleyway between our proposed building. This is assuming things are approved, but we just want to educate ourselves to the process. We would likely need a stoop from our new front entrance, which would require 1 to 2 steps from the first floor level of the retail space to the sidewalk space, which would...
Would this be on the property?
No, it would be on village property.
Okay.
And that would require a handrail most likely. There'd also be an ADA accessible ramp, which would have a very shallow pitch, maximum 1 to 12 pitch from the sidewalk to a sidewalk adjacent to the building, as well as a connection of the proposed driveway to the sidewalk and potential planting beds. So we have spoken with Greg Phillips regarding water and sewer tie-in, and most of those facilities are already in place, and we hope to be able to tie in through the existing. However, we would likely want to bring power to the new building in underground, which would require a cut through the existing sidewalk. So I do understand the process of permitting to open up public streets and sidewalks. However, the main areas that we need clarification on are additional construction issues on the village property, primarily the building stoop, and the railing and sidewalks and potential planting beds. And then the last item that would also potentially fall on the village property are building overhangs. It's likely that our building will probably sit right on the property line so that it will fall in line with all of the other facades on Main Street in the immediate vicinity, to carry through the existing village aesthetic and character. So the design of the building, also similar to many of the facades on Main Street, will likely have cornice details and roof overhangs that might be 12 to 18 inches overhanging the village property line, but up in the air, potentially 18, 19 feet above. So our question is also any clarification or requirements that the village might have for us to have building projections hang over onto the village property. So that's the reason for us appearing tonight, just so that we can start to plan ahead for the eventuality of asking permission to construct these elements.
So assuming that you get approval from the HDRB to demolish the current structure, and assuming you get approval from the ZBA for a variance for the front yard setback, why would we want to approve another stoop when what we're trying to do is get rid of stoops?
Well,
Why not have the entrance recessed in the into the building, as you would see on the blue olive across the, whatever the olive color is across the street?
right. That's a possibility. However, given one of the goals with our new building, and this is all assuming we're approved through those boards, is that we provide accessible access to the structure in as many avenues as possible, and bring the floor level as close to Main Street as possible. However, given the way the grade slopes in front of our property right now, even by doing so, by moving the door uphill, like right now the door to the building is downhill, so there are about 3 steps going up. There's, if you're familiar with the structure, there's a front porch
Yes,
that sits on the property, and
which sits on village property.
correct.
Yeah.
Right. And there are two steps. This is a small photo, but there are 2 steps up onto that porch,
Right.
and then a step up into the building. So essentially 3 steps. So we're trying to alleviate the impact of the stoop by moving the entrance uphill so that the floor level is closer to grade. However, we still, just in terms of the practicality of construction and protecting the floor level from water damage and the slope of the street in front of the building, there is going to be enough of a drop in the sidewalk level that there would be potentially 1 to 2 steps down to grade. So even if we were to recess the building, we'd likely,
No,
I'm sorry,
the building.
recess the entrance, I
Yes.
apologize. Recess the entrance, we would likely still need room for potentially 1 step outside, unless we significantly
Yeah,
step in
recess the whole
entrance.
So are you gonna do away with the current entrance to the retail space, because that's ground level? The side entrance that was
Right,
used for the
actually,
storage shop
our
is
proposed entrance to the retail space, we would be doing away with that entrance, which is approximately in this location, and we'd have an accessible entrance that's a little further back. So we'd have access directly from the sidewalk with an accessible paved area along the side of the building, and then into the structure here. So
The entrance and stoop are for,
the, an entrance that actually opens onto Main Street,
to what,
the retail space as
Okay.
well.
Because the current steps are the entrance to the apartments upstairs.
Correct, right, correct.
So you're proposing adding steps to the entrance to the retail space.
Yes, that's correct, that's correct. And
Well,
and
that's interesting, because it's on the east side of the building, and the east side of the building right now, there's a half a step to go from the current driveway into the building.
Right.
If the building is moved to the east,
right,
and the grade is similar there,
right.
why would you require 2 steps up? If the grade of the first floor is equivalent to, the elevation of the first floor is equivalent to the elevation of the first floor now.
Right. The elevation of the first floor of the building is proposed, it would be maybe a couple of inches above where the first floor is right now. Right now, the construction of the floor, and we can certainly work with the construction so that we don't have any wood below grade. Right now, the way the building is constructed, it's a wood frame building, and whether the grade has been manipulated over time, it's pushed up against the framing, so there's wood framing below grade. We're gonna the new construction will address that in terms of building materials that would not allow that to happen. However, in terms of addressing all of our required site drainage, the first floor will probably sit a few inches above the existing first floor level. And actually, the slope of the sidewalk, even though it doesn't appear extreme, it is a couple of feet from one end of the building to the other, or one end of the lot to the other. So it doesn't take much before you quickly require a step at least, if not two. And our maximum step height would be 7 inches to exit the building. So when you're exiting the door, you'd be required to enter at the door level and then step down. So you have a landing outside the door. And then step down to grade. So, and in terms of where our stoop would be located, it wouldn't be projecting into the existing sidewalk path, which continues. So it wouldn't project beyond, for example, the stoop or porch created in front of the Silver Spoon. It would be behind that line. So we're not proposing to project into the main sidewalk area. We're proposing to basically utilize the space that it's currently used in front of the building for the stoop and garden space, but we'd like to.
Which, I have to say again, which is all village property.
Absolutely, and that's why we're
The
here.
pipe for the brook, can you point out where that is?
Sure,
The pipe.
The pipe for the brook actually exits,
The pipe that comes off of Main Street.
okay,
Right,
so,
she's right where it is.
Right, but we're, yes,
right.
so.
So we believe, I don't know exactly where it is, it's underground, but
It used to be open to the air, and it is, right between you and McCaffrey.
right, so we're not proposing any trenching or of any
Who owns
sort.
that, who owns the property above that pipe? Is that yours or is that McCaffrey?
I understand that the Morantis put that pipe in, so I'm sort of.
Really?
That's what Caroline mentioned, yes.
Oh, okay, and who owns the property? Has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I've always wondered who owned the
The
property.
earth above the pipe?
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
the earth under the pipe and the
Right,
earth above the
right.
pipe.
Well, I honestly can't answer that. I don't know where the pipe goes once it's underground. You can see where it actually
comes
exits
out,
the
yeah.
ground, and it kind of overlaps 126 Main Street. Most of the stream is on the property to the east,
Which might be Heffernan.
right? Or McCaffrey, and then Phil's, yes.
That was just, I've always been curious about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, we're curious too, because I mean, underground, we just don't know, you know, does it run along the property line, does it angle up or down, I'm not sure.
My remembrance was it comes out at about a 90-degree angle from the sidewalk.
Okay, so then it would most likely run almost along the property
Perpendicular,
line.
right, okay. Parallel to the property, okay.
I'm curious, are you looking to purchase the stoop from the village? Is that the point of your
We,
parents here, or are you?
we are not, we are hoping there are provisions for the village to allow us to connect our building to the
Okay.
village sidewalk.
But this is based on whether you build a new building or the old building remains, either way, you're gonna wanna build something there, is that the point?
Most likely, because if the old building remains, you know, we'll cross that bridge, but we would likely renovate it and reconfigure the entries again, because we wanna provide, accessible entrances, and part of that would be relocating the entrances to the other side of the building. So Yes,
Okay, so this is not, I just don't understand why we're having the discussion exactly, I'm sorry.
So your questions are basically what permits do you need, or what permissions do you need if we were going to give you permission, or if you're not gonna, whatever. So we wanna know whether or not we're gonna allow this, and if we do allow it,
correct.
What's the
What is the
process?
process, and, so as well as, again, as well as these connections at ground level, you know, the feasibility of us constructing building overhangs and
right.
architectural details that overhang the property into the village airspace, essentially.
This is the first time, I think this has come up in a long, long time. We'd have to go back and look at the code in terms of the building overhangs, in terms of street openings, that's in the code, so
Right,
that's there.
correct.
In terms of, requesting that a new stoop be permitted, that's the first time that I've heard that coming up.
Well, we'd have to decide if we wanted to sell the property, first of all. I mean, we wouldn't allow you to build, I just personally wouldn't allow you to build further on it without owning it. So I think it would go to the board if they wanted to sell that property.
So
Okay.
that's an option, right? You request that the village sell you 4 feet by 4 feet, or whatever the dimensions are. And
Right.
that's something that we do fairly on a more regular basis.
So even if we're trading off building area that currently occupies village land, it's,
Yes, yes.
okay.
I don't see,
And this would be the first time we've had to actually, you know, with the other stoops that we've sold are stoops. They're not building on, they're already, they're incorporated into the life of the village already. This would totally, I mean, it would put a different look on that area. It would, I think, narrow the sidewalk, the feel of it all. I mean, those are things, I mean, I'd have to go up and take a look at it.
Yeah.
This is new to me, so,
Yeah, certainly, and just again to reiterate, we have no intention of narrowing the sidewalk as it exists now.
no, but encroaching on it the full length of the building.
No,
No encroachment, your existing sidewalk basically runs.
No, I understand that, but you're putting a new stoop, it's just the shaded area?
So, basically, this shaded area right now is not sidewalk, there is.
The yellow, yeah, I
That's
understand that. And there's a
occupied.
small porch on the end, and you
Correct.
wanna put a stoop on the darker shaded area.
We, just on this one area here, the small rectangle outside.
The other one's
door.
removed, and you're just leaving that small, okay, so.
These would be street level paved areas connecting a pathway between the buildings,
Mhm,
and
okay.
so it would be essentially an extension of the sidewalk. So the stoop would be maybe a 4-foot by 5-foot landing outside the door. So we're not talking about a full-length porch or anything like that, nothing that would have a roof over it. It's simply a way
It would
to
not.
exit.
It would not have a roof.
It would not have a roof. No,
Where
this
would-
is simply a way to get step down from the first floor level safely to the sloping sidewalk.
where would the steps be? Would they be on the east side, on the south side, or?
The
South
steps
side.
would be directly out the building, and they would actually head downhill. So they wouldn't head straight out to the street because, again,
Because
we
it's
don't want to
one.
create
Yes, I mean,
situations that you see throughout the village where you're stepping off a level step onto the slope sidewalk. So what we'd like to do is step down, again, within this space, so we're not projecting or encroaching on the current sidewalk width, but step within this space, which is about 5 feet wide, down to a level platform, and then have sidewalk that would connect to.
Do you have a drawing of that elevation, like, or a sketch that you can send us of what this proposed
Sure, yeah,
porch would look like?
yeah,
Or deck, or whatever it's gonna be?
absolutely.
And the size?
Yes.
And the
Okay.
overhangs would be
That'd be
where?
very helpful.
So the overhang, the new building, would be approximately 23 feet. The width of the facade, the existing building is about 26 feet. So the proposed building is about 23 feet, facing Main Street. And most likely, it will have a parapet facade, as it currently has. And so the overhang would be the full width of the building, approximately 20 feet. an overhang, again, once we iron out details with the Historic Review Board, I suspect maybe an 18 to 20-inch building overhang within the airspace. And that's at its highest point, and there may be an intermediate overhang over the doors, but nothing with posts that are coming down to the ground. This is just ornamentation on the building, again, to keep the aesthetic within the village character, historic character.
And you're proposing, if you do build a new building, you're proposing a 3-foot passageway between your building and the Silver Spoon?
We're proposing a 5-foot separation of the building between, so there'd be, if we're allowed to demolish the existing structure and build a new one, we're proposing to construct the new building 5 feet away from the.
What is the side yard setback, in B1?
5.
Okay.
Yes. And also, the code for B1 allows for a special permit which would allow us to place the building in line with other buildings that are within 200 feet away on the same
On the
lot
same
and
side,
same
yes.
side.
Yes, otherwise it's a 40-foot setback.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And in terms of the code, building overhangs and the code, what it allows for is overhangs of eaves and cornices into the setback, but it does not clarify overhangs onto the village or someone else's property. So you are allowed to have overhangs within your setbacks,
Right,
but
but
not over
you're-
the property.
you're-
So that,
You're proposing no setbacks, so I could take the code and say that therefore there are no overhangs that are allowed because the overhang is not in the setback, it's on village, the overhang is over village property.
right,
I think
and
it,
thus we are here. So-
I think that there are things that, my opinion, there are things that could be done to accommodate what you want to do. You have other more major hurdles to overcome, I think, before we're ready to talk about this. But it seems to me that we could accommodate something along the lines of what you're looking for. Whether it's you purchase the area from the village, or we permit a new stoop on Main Street.
Mhm.
Also, like with the stoops we sold was, I think it's $4 a square foot, so you're not talking, I mean, you'd have to deal with, the survey and any attorney's fees, but it's not a huge amount of money, which would eliminate some of your problems if overhangs would no longer be over village
Right.
property. So,
Right.
You already have a survey, and you already have gone through many of the steps, so it would not be a large, if we're talking 5 by 4, that's 20 square feet, we're talking $80.
no, I would
So-
think it would be the distance of the property.
Oh,
Because
So-
if you're talking about the overhangs on the building, which are the full length of the building,
oh.
I think it would be in everyone's best interest to own the whole piece of property, the whole strip,
Okay,
which is
so-
$640 maybe.
Right, so you're,
plus-
the cost is $4 per square foot?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. And so is that something that, the board's saying clearly now that would be the decision, or is it something you would look
I need
into
to-
as far
I
as?
need to take a look at it,
Right,
really.
yeah.
And if you can get us a sketch, it could be very rough, as long as we understand
Absolutely.
what it looks like, that would be good.
Okay.
One last question, and that 5 feet between the buildings, if it exists, if it does exist, what's going in there?
Our proposal is to have a gravel path with paving stones, stepping stones, because we need to accommodate drainage in between the buildings. We would have a gate of some sort between the structures, which you do see in a couple locations on Main Street where there are narrow separations between buildings. And primarily, it's to allow for the appropriate maintenance and fire separation between the buildings. Right now, one of the issues we're contending with is the building on 126 Main Street, our property, and the Silver Spoon are immediately adjacent but not connected. There's actually about 6 inches between them, and they've suffered serious neglect for many, many years. And so correcting, maintaining, and rectifying those problems is one of the major issues on the property. So our goal with the new construction would be able to separate them, which we think will be better for both properties in the long run, so that they can both be properly maintained. But basically, that will be like a utility alley for access for the owner.
I have another question about that alley. I was happy to hear that you were thinking about putting a gate in front. Would there be another gate at the back of the building as well? Because alleys, especially as large as you're talking about, can be a public safety issue.
Mhm.
So I was just wondering, they can tend to be dark. They can also be a place where people can get up to stuff.
Mhm.
So, were you planning on doing anything at the back of the building where it abuts, Silver Spoon as well?
No, there was no intent to add a fence there. Our hope was that people wouldn't trespass on the property. However, we do appreciate,
Yeah, we never
from a
thought of that.
safe.
That's a good
As a
point.
business owner whose business backs up into an alley that's a blind alley and who's been robbed through there
Right,
pretty recently,
yeah.
it's a dark space that anybody can go through the gate and get up to anything.
Right.
So, I would recommend that if you're gonna block it off at the front, you should consider it in the back too.
Thank you.
Or at least definitely put security lighting. So,
Thank you, I appreciate those.
Sure.
I'll leave that.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, so in terms of just moving forward, could we present drawings of our proposed stoop at your next meeting? Is that
Is-
something?
Can you send it to us or drop it off here and so we can look at it?
Okay,
I mean,
Before we
it's
put
sort
it-
of
I
a bit
definitely won't be
early
ready.
because you still don't know whether or not you're going to be building a new building or keeping the one you have.
it's true, we don't, however, the reason we are here now is we're trying to get clarity for all steps that potentially lie ahead, so that down the road, if, for example, purchasing the property is something that is an eventuality, that's something that could take some time. So it's important for us to have clarity on what would be required, because if we need to move forward on that, we understand there will be a process in surveying, defining the metes and bounds of what we hope to purchase, and actually proceeding with that. So
Don't you already have a survey?
we do, however, we would need to have the new area that we want to
Meet- the new
purchase
meets and bounds.
clarified, and as we all know, the purchase of the property won't happen overnight. So if that is what will ultimately be required, we just want to kind of prepare for that.
Okay.
So I will get drawings of that, and then if need be, we're happy to come to another meeting to kind of proceed with clarifying that.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for your time.
Okay, speaking of real estate and selling stoops, resolution 27, 2017, authorizing the mayor to enter into contract for sale of real property. This is Gail Hannah's place, diagonal from us. What's the number on that?
66.
56 Main.
Yep.
So I'll make a motion to authorize myself to
To sign the contract.
to sign the contract.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
This is the one we looked at last week, right,
Right.
we needed clarification on, so.
There was a question last week on whether the resolution it actually didn't have that they would, that the purchaser would, they'd be responsible for any legal fees, and which isn't needed in the resolution. It's already been agreed upon, so
It's in the contract.
just wanted to clear that up. So, we have a roll call vote. I vote aye. Trustee Murphy,
Aye.
Trustee Early.
Yes.
Trustee Miller,
yes.
and Trustee Villotto.
Yes.
Congratulations, Gail.
That was
For
for
the proud owner. Okay. I'm just gonna do, skip the 5 and I'll get to you guys. It's just a quick approval of the minutes and that's it. So make a motion to approve the minutes, workshop meeting 9/5/17.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, next we have a presentation from Gabriel Salas. Hopefully I pronounced that right, hydroelectric. Steve was talking about this last week and gave us some information, so.
Wonderful. Thank you. The project is about the installation of power generation equipment in the water treatment facility on Fishkill Road. The presentation will be made by Paul Curran, who is the managing director of BQ Energy, a renewable energy developer.
His name again, sorry.
Paul Curran.
C-U-R-R-A-N.
Sure.
Very good.
This do you want?
I have, you can give those out here.
You don't want?
That's why I have copies for the board. My name is Paul Curran. I'm the managing director of BQ Energy. We're a small renewable energy development company. We're located in Wappingers Falls. We develop wind and hydro projects throughout the Northeast, and really we've done a couple internationally as well. What we look for in a project is to make sure that we're obviously developing with renewable energy, it's kind of our focus, but also we find the right site for it. We're looking for, generally speaking, landfills and brownfields, and I'll go through that for wind and solar, and there's a reason for that. This project, as we spoke with Gabriel about it, sort of fits our core values very well, in the sense that it's using a resource which is not currently utilized. We're not taking away valuable land or valuable resources in order to make the renewable energy power that we're talking about. So it fits very nicely. It is an expansion of our business, and it makes a lot of sense. Going through the presentation, I'll go very quickly. I'm a New York Mets fan, so I could sit here all night. But
Maybe your whole lifetime.
there you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was harsh.
That really was harsh, wasn't it? So BQ Energy's profile, we were founded in 2002. We develop renewable energy projects, as I say. A couple of pretty pictures of some of our projects. The closest project on there is in Putnam County in Patterson, on the landfill in the town of Patterson. We built that in 2 phases about 3 years ago, and then the second phase we finished last year. The newest project is the one on the bottom in Esopus, New York, again on the landfill, just up the Hudson. It's a project where we sell the electricity to the town of Esopus under a long-term contract. So these are in different places and different regimes and so forth. What we do is we develop the project, so we get through all of the regulatory hurdles. We work with the DEC, we find the financing, we build it, we with local electricians and local contractors, obviously, and then we wind up owning the project long term. So that's what we're trying to do with all of our projects, is make sure that they're done appropriately. There's a long list of projects that we've done that you can read at your leisure. Our project approach is to buy people's equipment, so we don't make turbines, we don't make wind turbines, we don't make solar panels. We'll buy stuff that is well made and tier 1, if you will, in terms of equipment that has been used elsewhere, and we know it comes with a long-term warranty and so forth. We're really not research people. We're trying to make electricity in a very, very clean way and use things that are going to last for 20 years or 30 years, as the case may be. The resource that we're utilizing, be it wind, solar, or hydro, is always going to be there. So the equipment that we're going to use is not intended to wear out after a few years. The meat of the project, the presentation starts on page 6, and I direct you to that page, if you will. In the village of Cold Spring, you know this better than I, there's a water resource up on Lake Surprise Road. That is a natural flow down to an area by the water treatment plant off of Fishkill Road. There, water is pumped up to water treatment, and there's also water that's spilled, if you will, into a creek, which eventually goes to the Hudson. The water that is spilled is the resource that we've looked at and we believe can be utilized to generate approximately about 100 kilowatts of electricity. That power could be sold to the village for your own use, and the commercial transaction would be between us as the owner of that little turbine and the village is what we're proposing here. The the diagram on chart 7 shows this. Again, what we're doing is putting a piece of equipment into the area by the water treatment plant up on Fishkill Road. It would not impact the water coming to the village. It would not impact potable water supply to the extent that water was short for some reason, like a drought or something else. Our equipment wouldn't get a feedstock. It wouldn't get water that was being spilled. This would only operate when water is being sent in through via the spillway to the Hudson. So it's wastewater. It's very clean water, but it's water that is not being used for another purpose. And it would always be that, to the extent that the village decided not to send water down here for some water emergency and reason, we would see less of a resource. What we're doing is using the resource which is currently being sent to the Hudson. The picture on chart 8 simply shows where we are. If you go up on Fishkill Road, you can see the area that we're talking about. There's an existing luxury hut up there. We would be locating in that hut. Our equipment would fit in without disrupting the existing equipment. And the water which is currently going into the creek that goes to the river is where we would locate our equipment and go from there. Chart 9 shows the project structure. This is kind of the business deal. We would own the project for 20 or 30 years or longer. These pieces of equipment tend to last for a very long time. Take some maintenance, but because the resource is always going to be there, we would obviously want to keep maintenance quite up to snuff. This time of year is when you do maintenance on a hydroelectric project, because we're, after the snow melt, after the heavy rains in the spring, there's more water available to us. So generally speaking, in the fall is when you try to do some of the maintenance on these, and we would make sure we would do it. We would sell electricity via a net metering system. So to the extent that there's not enough of electricity load up at the facility itself, those credits would go over to bills, other bills being used, generated, or usage, if you will, from Central Hudson to the village. We do that routinely. The project I alluded to before, up in the town of Esopus, we make electricity at their landfill. They don't use very much electricity at the landfill, but what happens is there's credits on their Central Hudson bill at other locations. So in that case, Town Hall, the fire department, in their case, is a town bill, wastewater treatment plants, that type of thing. So we can do this. The 15% credit would generate about $10,000 a year in savings. What you're giving up for the $10,000 is a couple of square feet up at the up in that pump house that we showed before, up in that house. In no case can you lose money if we're giving you a 15% discount. This doesn't require an investment from the town. We would do that. We would do the development, the permitting, and so forth. I'll talk about your roles in a second, but what we're structuring this is a privately owned turbine that would be ours, and we would sell electricity to you from that privately owned turbine. Chart 10 and 11 get into some of the questions that you may have. Roles and responsibilities. So we would be responsible for DEC permitting. We would be responsible for drafting legal agreements. We'd be responsible for going to Central Hudson. This requires an interconnection study to make sure that the wires along Fishkill Road can take electricity in the event that you're not using it. We do these rather routinely. We're just about to start construction on a facility, a solar facility in Beacon, much larger than this, but we've gone through those types of studies with them. We're used to the Central Hudson and the DEC going through our projects and understanding what we're doing. We would go through seeker, we would go through any hydrological studies, we would purchase the equipment, manage the equipment, operations, maintenance, any type of permitting, public hearings and so forth that you would recommend. What you would be required for are the 4 bullets on the right. So certainly you'd be lead agent and seeker, or we assume you would be. You would be responsible for reviewing plans. You would give us a building permit or not. So those types of reviews would be normal and necessary. If we're talking to the DEC and you wanted to be involved, you certainly have every right to be as the property owner, and we'd welcome that, frankly. You'd have to review legal agreements. Typically, we pay you for that, reimburse you if that's appropriate for the village. That's up to you. And then we have to grant a site access. So there'd be a lease in place that would allow us to do that. We try to, in any one of these things where we're doing something new, what could go wrong? And you probably could think of more things that we didn't. But what could go wrong in development? Typically, what we do is we sign a memorandum of understanding that says that you're not responsible for any costs and you're not responsible, but we're allowed to apply for interconnection and we're allowed to apply to the DEC. And that's it. So if we don't do that, we spent some money and you've gotten some drawings perhaps. If the project is determined to be unviable for some reason, that can't get permits or something else, then the MOU is canceled and again, we've lost out. During construction, if we interfere with the water department operations, we're not going into an operating pipe, so I don't think we're able to do that. That's certainly something that you would make sure in our lease that we can't do that. And we understand that and we don't want to do that. But those are important and we have to work with the water department to make sure that those rules are clearly understood. We have those types of rules on every one of our projects on brownfields and landfills, as you can imagine. This is different, but we want to make sure they're. We would have to have insurance, we do on every project we do, for liability purposes, indemnifying you from any type of liability that we might cause. During operations, drinking water quality, this is not drinking water we're talking about, so there can't be any impact from that. If there's a water shortage, as I say, seasonal or otherwise, we just don't get a feedstock, and we understand that part. What we're looking for is to use the feedstock that you are currently sending to the river. It's overflow water, and that's what we want to use as a resource, so it's a resource that makes sense to us. I've been talking a lot. Want to open up for questions?
Does anybody know how frequently the spillover stops?
Well, Gabe would have an idea of that, as the engineer.
Yeah, so you have to split a little bit of the seasons, as Paul was saying. There's about 7 to 8 months of the year
Yeah.
that the pond on the Fishkill Road, you know, you have a little accumulation pond where you pump to it's much bigger than the needs for the town. So at least during half the year, you'll always have spillover, right? The other smaller smaller half of the year, if you want, it depends. If it just rains, you'll have a flood, and it's gonna come a lot, and whatever you take, you're not gonna be taking enough. And sometimes you just have to turn off the equipment because there's no excess water for the power production unit. All the water goes to the drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And we're used to that for our wind and solar. Obviously, we don't get sunny days every day, and we don't get windy days every day. And the fact that it's an advantage to us in the sense that, as Gabriel says, there's certain times of the year where we would expect less flow, like right now, and that allows us to schedule maintenance, sort of preventive maintenance before we have an issue.
What happens when we connect to the aqueduct? I would imagine that there won't be any spillover.
Actually, the other way around.
Right.
So what if the power, if you connect to the aqueduct,
Yes.
all the water that flows in the basin between the Lake Surprise, the old Cold Spring Reservoir and the accumulation pond,
Yeah.
instead of going back to the water treatment facility, you will just throw in the natural course. So it'll go through our facility anyway.
Right.
Selfishly, it's great.
Okay.
Hopefully for this village,
Okay.
you get that quick.
What plan would you have? The pond near this building, near the water treatment plant, is used from time to time as a recreational area.
Mhm.
Would this building be restricted in some way so that there's no danger to the public or anything like that, or from kids?
It's really way out of the way.
Sure.
There's no change whatsoever
Uh-huh.
to anything upstream from the dam. So if you wanna jump and dive and fish and
No,
anything,
we don't.
it's the same as today. If
That's
feeling jolly one day.
I'm just
If
thinking
you go
of
fishing, if
people
you
go
wanna,
fishing.
if you wanna do anything there,
Yeah.
there's no change between now and later.
There's no-
Okay.
Because all the works are just, there's a little spigot that comes out of one of the pieces of equipment, which is a valve,
Mhm.
and you'll connect there a little turbine, which will produce power with the water, and the water will go back. So you don't get in there
Right.
Okay,
From a security point of view, we would certainly make sure that it's locked at all times.
okay.
It's electrical equipment, so we want to make sure that it's appropriately done. The other thing that we will do, which is sort of a beefed up piece, is that we'll be having a computer readout so that we can tell how it's working at all times. That alerts us to any kind of issues as far as a need for maintenance and that type of thing. It's also handy for education. Many of the school districts we work with like to see
Oh, that's
those types of
interesting.
systems, and frankly, we like to brag about our work, so it makes sense.
So this is your first attempt at hydroelectric?
Yes, and it's frankly one of the first attempts that I'm aware of in the region. I mean, there's plenty of little hydro plants on streams,
Yeah.
but for a municipal system to be operated in this way, there's many places where it should be done, but I'm not aware of very many that have done this. So Gabriel is much more familiar with it, with the technology. We're much more familiar with with energy production, and from a financial point of view, we're very comfortable making this type of investment. It makes a lot of sense to us. But Gabriel, are you familiar with many others that have done this?
Yes, actually, it's a technology that's 150 years old.
That's good.
So you can go see a plant in Wappingers that was built in 1906.
Is this on the creek, on the Wappingers Creek?
It is, right next to our
Yes.
office.
The private company,
That's right.
Yeah,
okay, not the Village of Wappingers.
not the Wappinger Falls has I
Okay,
forget. So this one there.
they have that?
Yeah, it's a little different in structure to this, but this is a very common way of dealing with water department infrastructure and power production as a secondary product of that infrastructure.
And what discount do you give the Wappingers Falls?
Oh, it's a completely different structure. It's
Okay.
completely private. He sells to the grid, nothing to do with the water department. Actually, he owns
He's a
the
wholesaler.
entire
It's private.
the
Okay,
entire structure.
okay,
He sells to Central Hudson.
right.
I lied. I remember now. He has a deal with the town, and he gives a royalty
To the village, right?
to the village of Wappingers
Yeah.
for the use of their dam.
Okay.
It's much smaller than that number.
So I have to ask, how much are you guys gonna make a year on this?
Typically, the rate of return on these kinds of projects is about 8 or 9%.
What,
About 8 or 9% is usually the rate of return on these kinds of projects.
uh-huh,
I don't, honestly, because what we're doing is giving a discount, our revenue is very dependent on what Central Hudson charges.
yes.
So, to say that we have a guaranteed rate of return would be wrong, but usually, when we look at these types of projects, it's about an 8 or 9% return.
In terms of that, Mike, could you explain any impact this would have on our CCA agreement that we're entering into?
So thanks for asking that question. I work as a contractor with BQ Energy and have been for about the last year. This, as we're talking about, has sort of developed in parallel to CCA discussions that I've also been working on separately. And so merging those two conversations together is a little bit new for me, but basically this project, what we sort of anticipate from a power production standpoint is the equivalent of about 35 homes. So in the context of the village, that may seem like a significant number. In the context of the aggregation we've put together for this CCA structure, it's about 20,000 homes. I don't think it's a measurable impact as to the sort of the pricing advantage that would be seen on the CCA side by taking away sort of this amount of power from the buying pool that goes into CCA, if that makes sense.
Is the village currently in the buying pool for the CCA?
So the way it
I thought there
works.
was some difference there.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the way it works is on the CCA side is, as we've discussed before, it's an opt-out program. And so that opt-out applies for residents and small businesses. The village accounts, could be opted in at your election. You know, if you decided to include those in the CCA, they could be included, but they're not automatically part of that program. So in many cases, you know, there are a lot of municipalities that buy power from the New York Power Authority, and so their accounts are already sort of spoken for, if you will. What we're proposing here, to some extent, would kind of make those accounts spoken for as well. You know, we looked at some of the power usage numbers from the village, and it's about 50%, the production we're estimating is about 50% of the village's consumption. It's about, I think, 85% of the consumption of the water treatment plant and the other water treatment plant.
So,
The water treatment plant that we're talking about, and then the wastewater treatment plant, thank you. But we have homework to do. I mean, we have to do hydrological studies, we have to do engineering studies, we have to do interconnection studies, which is why the best we can do right now is give you an estimate, and why we're here asking, is this of any interest before we go do those studies?
You know that the wastewater treatment plant usage, electrical usage plummeted
last year.
when we put.
I noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're down in the, I think, $1,300 a month
Yeah.
from 3,000 or more.
Yeah. That was the installation of the generator?
No, the aeration,
Aeration.
tiny bubbles.
I was talking to Greg about this project with the, and is there any chance of also using the outflow from the sewage plant down there, which he said, which then goes into the Hudson, which he says flow drops off so that it's gravity fed? I mean, did you guys look into that?
We've not yet. It would be a separate project, obviously.
Right.
And what we try to do with most of our projects is kind of earn our stripes. So I think as we're moving forward, you'll get to know kind of the team here, and you already know my colleagues. But you know, and if it makes sense, that type of a system is not uncommon. We'd have to look at the hydrologics of it to make sense. It's not an unusual thing in New York City where people are studying buildings and looking at, you know, a 20-story building and how much energy is there on the wastewater coming out of a building like that, and how much can be recaptured and so forth. Again, there it's a question of space. But those types of systems exist, and we'd be happy to look at it, but one at a time is the way we've approached these things.
What made you look at the village of Cold Spring? I mean, there's a lot of small municipalities along the Hudson River. What brought you to us?
Two really smart guys live close.
I live in Garrison, my sister lives
You know,
in
I mean,
Nelsonville.
I see that you've never done a hydroelectric project before. You're basically solar and wind.
That's exactly right.
You
You know, it's right. I think, you know, Gabriel, we were talking about it, Gabriel and Michael, and it made a lot of sense to us. It's a relatively small project. The cost of this is significantly less than the solar projects and the wind projects that we've done. It makes a lot of sense to do this type of a project locally. Again, we're down in Wappingers, and it was a 20-minute drive to here tonight. So being able to work with a local community on a project that's relatively small and makes a lot of sense, it appealed to us. And I think that there are other communities that could do this. And certainly we would expect that after we do one here, that we may do others in the Hudson Valley. It makes a lot of sense.
You know, from your letter that you're basically using us as a pilot project, that if this works, or as this works, you will then, you know, pass your good luck on to other projects.
I think we certainly hope to build into other projects of this nature. It makes a lot of sense to us from what we understand so far. So it's not particularly, you know, it's not new technology, as Gabriel said, but it is an application that can be replicated in other places in New York State and other places, period. And so we do hope that we'll do more of these as we move forward.
Do you have a company that's going to be the technology company that's actually going to fit the equipment together and get this going?
The equipment itself? Actually, Gabriel's got a lovely picture from Cornell that.
Yeah.
But who puts the whole thing together? Who actually, you know, I mean,
Who does the
You do,
construction?
Fran.
I do, I know, in my spare time.
So the typical form is that you just go to an equipment provider, and the equipment provider will send you a piece of equipment that looks a little bit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is one configuration, this is not the
Actually, saw
way.
these on your.
No, it's not, it's not.
Okay.
But ours is red, how does that work?
You just paint
Okay.
it.
That's
Who
the
does all the
gold one.
connections and all the technology?
So this is the typical water
Mhm.
pipe main,
Mhm.
and this is a bypass with a generation unit next to it. So it's not that complicated. Like, so I've done hydro elsewhere,
Mhm.
and the reason why this jumped to my attention is that when you build a hydroelectric power plant, from soup to nuts, 90% of the pains in the neck happen when you're building everything that moves water around.
Mhm.
This water department has it already built. So you have a reservoir, you have a dam, you have the penstock, you have the pipes, you have everything. And this is a secondary product that can that can add more production to what you already have. It's an underutilized asset. So that's really, when we're looking around with Mike, looking at things, that's what really caught our attention. Why this one? Because it fits, it checks a lot of boxes. It's reachable, it's of a dimension that's very manageable. And you know, it can, I think it could be very helpful for the town to produce a big chunk of its own consumption.
The first solar project we did on a landfill in New York State was in Patterson. The reason we did it in Patterson, because we wrote them a letter and said, you got a landfill there, can we use it? And they said, sure. It worked out fine, and it's been operating for 2-3 years now. There isn't a lot of science to that answer, but your answer of why would we do one in Cold Spring, we're asking, it makes a lot of sense to us. And if you said no, would we go look for someplace else? Probably. It would.
I think it's an important example of what can be done on such a
Absolutely.
small level to the whole state.
Absolutely. And I think you're right, Steve. It makes an awful lot of sense from that point of view. Renewable energy makes a lot of sense, but you need to realize that it can't be done everywhere. You don't have 30 acres of land that is not being used for anything else in Cold Spring, but you have this. And so we go around looking for where can we find those types of resources, landfills, brownfields, you know, land that just doesn't make sense. Because you do need a lot of land for solar, and you do need a lot of land for wind. It's just the sacrifice you make if you want to use those technologies. But in this case, the sacrifice is really rather minimal because it's water that's currently got a certain amount of head elevation and can be used for generating
It's
a certain
water
amount
over
of
the
electricity.
dam.
I'm sorry?
You're good, right?
Okay.
Waiting all night for that.
So is the
I
development,
was.
is the development of more projects like this and the growth of more projects like this part of your business plan for your
Yes.
company?
As I say, we'd love to do this here. It's the right size, makes a lot of sense. You know, it's gonna take a little more hand-holding because it's new to us.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we can come down to Cold Spring, you know, in 20 minutes makes a lot of sense. And can we do more of these as we move forward? We intend to do more of these.
Mm-hmm.
They just make a lot of sense to us from what we're looking at. It's very consistent with our philosophy of looking for undervalued resources to kind of capitalize on via landfill, brownfields for, you know, you need the land for solar and wind. In this case, you need some hydro head for this type of technology, and it makes a lot of sense to us.
Gabe, will you be running the project yourself, or is that?
I'll work with
She
BQ
asked.
on these.
Okay,
I'll
so
be
you are
working
the
with BQ.
contractor
Yes.
Yes.
of record, okay. To answer Fran's question before.
I don't know if he's a PE or not, but we'll have someone that does all those types of drawings.
Also, in sort of following up on that question, you know, who's gonna do the engineering and the design and the equipment building and the equipment installation? From a developer standpoint, which is the business of BQ Energy, the technology you're using sort of, it matters for the project, of course, but it works the same way with solar projects or wind projects. You know, the developer's job is to organize the permits, lease the land, find the right spot, measure the resource, arrange the financing, sort of put all those pieces together, and then work with sort of an equipment procurement and construction firm to identify the right equipment and get it in place. So, you know, that's how our solar projects are built the same way. We're not, you know, solar manufacturers or construction guys. We're arranging that and then organizing someone else to do the work and the installation. So the model is the same, the technology is different.
Absolutely.
And one of the things you said, and I think in your presentation, was it's not gonna cost us any money. Well, it is, because we're obviously going to get our engineer to look at what's gonna happen, and that's gonna cost us money. We're gonna have legal fees involved. So there is monetary output for the village.
Typically, we put an escrow up for that, but that's up to you.
Because, yeah, I mean, because I know definitely, I spoke to Greg today briefly. You know, he said obviously Bart, who's our engineer, is gonna be involved in this and looking at it, and that's, you know, money and time and.
You know, I'm a PE myself. I want you to do that. I mean, I want you to review these things, not just from the point of view of you know, it is relatively new to us. another smart engineer looking at these types of things finds a problem in advance, and that's a lot easier to design around than finding it later. So by all means, we encourage you to do that. The legal agreements are relatively simple, but you'll need somebody that looks through them and, you know, goes through the tedium of reading them and so forth. We do have a financing facility with the New York State Green Bank. We're the only developer, I think, that has that kind of a system, a facility available to us, so we can, you know, do this relatively quickly. We'd like to build it next summer, fall, when the water flow is slow, if we're able to move that quickly. What we're looking for in the near term is permission to talk to Central Hudson and talk to the DEC, and to begin the seeker process with you folks as well.
Well, I'm definitely interested. You know,
It would seem to me that, we got a copy of the MOU,
Yes.
in our package. I would think that we would want John to look that over
Fine.
before we do anything.
Mhm.
John will be our attorney.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
I could have guessed that.
It certainly sounds very, very interesting, and it seems beneficial to the village.
Hope so.
So I'm interested.
We should move with John and, you know, speak more in depth with Greg and Bart.
So I'll
Okay.
ask that we get that sent to John tomorrow.
We can send you an electronic copy if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Well, we need to outline the details of what you're offering in terms of escrow and things like that. Like,
Typically, we're told what type of escrow we should be putting up, but that's up to
so
you.
well, I didn't know how much involvement you would need from the water department, Greg's time, as well as our engineer that we have.
Yeah.
Who's very familiar with the system.
We'd be happy to sit down and try to work that out.
Yeah, okay.
Great. Thank you.
And on that, sorry, just, sure, I'll talk, but, we're just at the point of making measurements and collecting data. So, when it comes to escrow and spending a lot of time with Greg and Bart, that will not necessarily be required in the next month or 2 months, because there's still a lot of data to be collected for design work. We didn't want to do it before we had some understanding with the village
Mhm.
that they don't want to spend 2 months or 3 months going with a measuring stick to see how much water is there, if there's any, before knowing if this is a good prospect of a green light, if not a green light outright.
Mhm.
There is indeed, I think.
Okay, so we'll move it ahead. I think we're all interested and take a closer look.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything from our large audience tonight?
Huge audience.
Yes, Frank.
Yeah, it's pretty much, it's kind of mundane compared to all these other things, but there's a sidewalk hazard now.
What's that? Sorry.
There's a sidewalk hazard over on, I guess it's Depot Square. And if you go there in daytime, you can see it. The first tree, the sidewalk there, the first tree, the square is cracked and it's like a 3-inch thing. In the daytime you can see it, but it's gonna be really dangerous. It's like a 3-inch.
That's private property.
That might be private property. I
Knows
didn't
about
take
it?
a look at it. Fran brought that to our attention, and I believe it's private
I
property.
believe it's not our property, I believe the property belongs to the Depot Square.
So you could send them a note saying, this is not our
Or you can knock on
property.
the door and say.
You shall cover all liabilities.
No,
Please
the
fix
village doesn't own
But so anybody can say, hey, I'm gonna sue you. In other words, just getting the message to the person in question, which is what, the depot restaurant?
Whoever owns, whoever owns that property, I don't know who owns that property.
So the village doesn't own that sidewalk?
It's changed hands, so I don't know who the owner.
it.
All right, we'll look into it.
And the other one is the light, the flashing light on the Butterfield. That's not flashing, again, pedestrian, it says flashing 3/4 of a mile, it's pedestrians, but that light, either the bulb is out. Coming northbound on 90.
Yes, I know what you mean. Okay, I'll get in touch with Central Hudson.
The other one, on the northern part of town, doesn't work either. I noticed that just the other day.
How are you?
You signed an agreement for planning and engineering services for 35 Market Street tonight. and I represent their client, the owner of that property. We were given, the proposal, but the proposal was for something that we're not doing for the structural engineer. So can we have a copy of what was signed to see if that aligns with the services that we think and the HDRB thinks are being, reviewed?
Well, what was sent to us was from HDRB, and I believe Paul was in touch with Carolyn for that same reason.
Yes, but I don't know if what you signed was the agreement that we saw, which was incorrect, or there was, something that was revised. Apparently there's a revised version,
Right.
but we haven't seen that.
Okay, well, I don't know if we've had the review, I don't know, which,
Where's the problem, that,
In the Silman proposal, it is actually, saying they're reviewing,
hold on a second, let me find that.
so I think it's page 2 of the Silman proposal.
This is in the Silman proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, page 2, okay.
Well, I actually don't know if it's page 2, but, they are proposing to, determine the general structural adequacy of proposed structural alterations. There are no proposed alterations. They are supposed to be, reviewing an existing conditions report.
I
And
don't-
there's a monetary value that my client would be covering that for something that's proposed, and there is nothing proposed. It's basically whether, the demolition is,
I
you know.
don't see that. Do you have, on page 2,
I'm not necessarily sure it's page 2, I think that was somewhere
I don't see
further
anything on
down.
page 2, so it's definitely not page 2.
so
But
we-
if it's, we were given a proposal from Silman dated, September 18th.
yes, that's what I have,
That's-
September 18th.
Yeah, so I don't think that's the revised proposal. Apparently there was one dated the 19th.
Okay, we have in front of us
August
the 18th. So, what I can do is check to see what Jeff has
Mhm.
tomorrow.
Okay.
Are you going to be around tomorrow?
We're always, yeah, you can
Um,
contact us.
after the meeting, if you could give me your cell phone
Sure.
number and, maybe we can straighten it out with him tomorrow.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see it. Anything else? Motion to adjourn,
Second.
all in favor?